Hey folks, Candor here again with a question for you all. I'm sure by now you've all seen photos of lightning storms similar to these and wondered how did they get these perfectly timed shots so consistently? I took these and many more a few years ago, and I'm going to show you how it's done. While cleaning out my closet the other day, I came across a piece of camera equipment I had that allows me to do this and a few other things as well. Today, I'm going to show you what I used and how it's done. So before we begin, I just have to say, first off, this won't work with a cell phone or a pocket point and shoot camera. And while these types have come a long way in technology, they may only be able to approximate or emulate some of the functions I'm about to discuss. You really need a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, similar to the one that I have. This is my Nikon D5000 DSLR, and it has been a great learning camera for me and has allowed me to take some amazing shots. Now I know not everyone has one of these types of cameras, but if you do, you're already halfway there. And they can be a tad expensive and a bit daunting and seem complicated, but honestly, I didn't pay as much as you might think I did for this. In fact, I bought this as a bundled kit on sale years ago for about $500, which included the camera, a bag, the 50mm, and this telephoto lens, a memory card, and a few extras. Expensive, perhaps, but seeing as cameras of this type can easily run much higher, it was a good deal. But today you can get a Nikon D3500 for about $430 or a Canon EOS 2000D for about $420. Not horrible for an entry-level DSLR. And let's face it, unless you're a professional shooting for National Geographic or making a living off of photography, there isn't a reason to be spending $2,400 or more for just a camera body. This is my Nero Trigger device, which I love dearly, and it has 6 operating modes. Also, this unit isn't available any longer, but there are other choices out there, and they are about the same price, but they have newer features than what mine does. I'll put a link below in the description for one that I have found. So let me try and explain a little bit about how all this works. First, you have your camera. Now, for most of these modes, you're going to need to have your camera in manual mode. You have your Nero Trigger. Now, for easeability, it does have the ability to actually slide onto the hot shoe of your camera. Now, this is convenient, especially when you're trying to take pictures of lightning and the such, because it keeps it right there on the camera. And honestly, you don't need a flash when shooting lightning, so there's no reason why you shouldn't put it there. Now, the Nero also has a cable that plugs into the side of the unit, and it also has a hole if you do want to insert an external flash. The cable simply plugs into your camera here, or in a similar port on whatever camera you happen to have. This connects the Nero Trigger to the camera. Now again, as I've said, most of these operations require you to have your camera in manual mode. You will need to actually set the ISO, aperture, and shutter speeds for the correct conditions. I'm not going to go into that much detail about this as this isn't a photography course. But in a nutshell, ISO is the film speed or the camera's current light sensitivity setting. The larger the number, the more sensitive to light it is. Aperture is the size of the iris opening, which controls how much light enters into the camera. The bigger the number, the smaller the opening. The shutter speed is how fast the shutter opens and closes when the shutter is activated. And while this can sound complicated, it really is more time-consuming than anything else. But the more you do it, the easier it becomes. I am not a photography master, and I'm still struggling to this day with the settings on my camera. But I still get some amazing shots. The only thing that you need is to make sure that you have the correct cable for the camera. In other words, don't buy a cable for a Canon camera if you have a Nikon camera. Now, let's go on to the actual trigger itself. And I'm going to try and give you a few demonstrations as to how this works. Lightning mode. This is the default mode for the unit and is what I exclusively use this for. Using the controls, you simply change the sensitivity settings up or down to what you want and then press start. Now there will be a little bit of trial and error while you adjust the sensitivity depending on the current situations at the time. After pressing the start button, a few seconds later the unit goes into action, and anytime it detects a flash of light, it will trigger the camera to take a picture. Under the right conditions, it can also be used for fireworks displays. Now this can be a bit on the light sensitive side at higher settings, so again, trial and error will be needed. Sound mode. With this mode, you can trigger your camera to go off when it detects a sound, like a popping balloon or shattering glass or whatever. Now in the settings menu, you again select your sensitivity rate up or down to the desired level, and then change the delay in milliseconds before the camera is triggered. Now mine has a feature called lock on or off. And this is to tell the unit to continue to keep taking pictures if it detects sounds, or to only take one photo after it first detects the initial sound. Now to give you an idea, I'm going to show you just how sensitive this can be to sound. Laser mode. Similar to the sound mode, but uses a laser as a trigger. Again, just set the threshold for the sensitivity level and then the delay in milliseconds to trigger the camera after the beam has been broken. One use for this might be to capture a raindrop falling into a puddle, breaking the beam, and triggering the camera to go off. Now, given what I have to work with, I've tried to set up this demonstration to explain what's going on. On the left, we have the Nero Trigger, which is plugged into my camera. On the right-hand side, we have a laser. Now, that laser is pointing directly at the Nero Trigger. Now, I'm going to drop a die from above, and when it falls, it will break the laser beam, and it will cause the Nero Trigger to activate the camera. Now the reason that the roll of tape is there is that because without it there won't be a point of reference, and if I didn't do that it would look as if the die were resting on the table. And this is the final image that was captured. Notice that the trigger was set off and I have a picture of the die falling, and I captured it before it actually hit the table. Time-lapse mode. In this mode, there are three options: interval, exposure, and limit. The interval setting tells the unit to trigger the camera after a specified number of seconds. The exposure setting sets the exposure time for each photo, while the limit setting tells the unit how many photos to take. Now I don't use this setting myself since I have a much nicer intervalometer, and it has a little bit more features than what this one does. Now this is also used in conjunction with the bulb function of your camera. And basically all that does is put your camera into a mode where the shutter will remain open until you have released your finger off the shutter. One instance that I have used this was in capturing a time lapse of Venus going across the night sky. And here is the picture that I took. Now before I started, I went out and manually took some photos ahead of time to see what would be the optimal time for an exposure. Once I had that, I just entered that time into the exposure and told the unit how many minutes apart I wanted to take the photo, and then told it that I wanted to take 5 photos. HDR mode. This is another mode that I don't use much, and I am not very proficient in high dynamic range, and I'm also not a big fan of the results, as they are highly subjective according to who is editing the photos. The way this works is that there are 3 settings: center, level, and frame. What this does is after you have set your center starting exposure, you then edit the amount of level change in exposure between each shot and how many frames you want. It will then take those photos for you. You then need to bring them into a photo editing software and combine them together. This is where it becomes subjective to the person editing the photos, since it is up to you to decide how much of the shadows, contrast, exposure, detail, etc. you want to blend to get the final photo. What you are trying to do is to get a photo or two that is underexposed and a few overexposed, while also taking one that is optimally exposed. In the end, the result is to try and get the shadows boosted from the underexposed shot while adding the highlights from the overexposed shot, and also help to enhance the overall colors as well. Another one of those advanced techniques that I don't really use much. Now you'll need to use a tripod and put your camera into bulb mode for this to work. All this is just an automated way to take several shots in quick succession at different exposure levels without you having to stop between each photo and making changes to the camera. Now the only mode that I didn't cover is the DIY mode. This is by far the most advanced mode that this device offers. With this, you're able to create custom triggers by building your own trigger cable that plugs into the side of the unit. There really is no limit to what you can use this for. I have never used this mode, and I doubt I ever will. This is even a bit much for me and my limited photography skills. I've had a lot of fun using this, and I would encourage you to try something like this if you can. You can get some amazing results with a little trial and error. I hope you found this interesting, and as always, if you like what you see here, then please press that subscribe button, and don't forget the bell icon to be notified of a new video. So until next time, stay safe, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye!